Right, should be going out on YouTube, folks, coming up in 7-8 minutes. If you're watching an archive version, you might want to fast forward to the top of the show. Otherwise, hey, bit of copyright-free music for you. Coming up in 7-8 minutes, Robin Horsley, Total. Coming up in 4 minutes, folks. that's enough of that. Hey folks, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good people. Welcome to the Daily Chaos. AutoApp KO. I'm Ollie Connolly. Thanks for turning up. And now, total. Deep State elder Henry Kissinger and his hemorrhoid henchmen, such as war criminals Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, are now openly calling for global government. EU cohorts are calling for a universal basic income, for a cashless society, and for enforced vaccinations. The state is becoming the parent, and we are all becoming subservient. The establishment media continues to endorse the tyranny and lies that is the China state, to deceive in unison about the coronavirus statistics, and to use the crisis, which many scholars are hailing as hyperbolic, to clear a path for totalitarian global government. Discuss! And here to discuss this depiction with me now is Robin Horsley of the Great Brexit Debate. God bless you, Robin Horsley, sir. Now of ukpolitics.uk. upolitics.uk. upolitics. Yep. .uk. Robin, thank you very much indeed for popping in. I think that Chris Boozy has just popped in from stateside as well. Boozy, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Well, look, I want to get a few remarks from Robin first of all, and then I'm going to pull you in. Thank you. I'll be very interested to hear what you have to say, not least on the latest coronavirus briefing last night from the White House. Robin, is my depiction unfair?
In what respect?
Well, there's some pretty strong claims there that we are essentially seeing this coronavirus crisis being used as a means to hail in a totalitarian global government.
Well, I mean, I think the question is ultimately, is this thing, has this thing been done in order to achieve something like that? Or is it something that is being exploited by people such as Gordon Brown and Tony Blair publicly in order to try and bring about their kind of world vision? I think that's the kind of first question. And I don't think they're unreasonable questions. No, there's the difficulty we've got, I think, at the moment is that nothing seems reasonable, does it? The sort of semi-official explanation, which even that is accepted as being not a certainty, is that some bloke ate a bat in China, and suddenly the world's got a pandemic to deal with.
Yeah. Well, maybe
so even that explanation, it just seems rather incredible. So
yes. Well, for example, maybe a good way to lead into this. I was listening to an interview on talk radio today. It come out of London or come out of wherever they happen to be in quarantine these days, I guess. Peter Hitchens talking to, is it Mike Graham? And which is a great show. I really enjoy Mike's show on there, although I find it fascinating, as tends to be the case with the mainstream media. Not so much the questions that he asks as the questions he leaves out. But Peter Hitchens, for example, is a world-renowned journalist and scholar, I think it's fair to say, who is very, very concerned that we're seeing this coronavirus used as a means to bring in the most dystopian laws in the UK. But the UK is just one of many, many examples. not dissimilar to what we're seeing in France, in Italy, in Spain, and to a slightly lesser extent perhaps, but nonetheless on course in the United States and many, many states around the world. Now, he's very, very worried about that. Whereas, for example, Mike Graham was saying, you're talking nonsense, mate. And these are just necessary measures. We kind of go to the extreme of that side of the argument, and we get the sort of the Piers Morgan type rhetoric, which is saying that you absolutely have to have this new dystopia and accept it 100%, embrace it. And actually, the government isn't going far enough. But what these people, the Morgans, the Grahams, seem to be leaving out of the equation, the sort of thing that maybe the Hitchens are more concerned about, is how much of this crisis is a crisis and how much of it is contrived, given that we cannot trust the Chinese state about anything, actually. It's a state that has concentration camps, for crying out loud, and the most appalling human rights record. And also, given that the statistics regarding this thing, be it the contagion rate or the mortality rate, again, are highly contestable, not least of all because the testing kits largely just don't work. How much of this crisis is genuine, I suppose, is a first question, as opposed to how much of it has been hyped. And then we can go on to maybe where that hype or
the other way around
situation is. Yeah.
All the other way around, Ollie, that it's much, much worse than the stats indicate. That would be more logical, that it's much, much worse, because then the extreme actions, for example, of the British government in terms of trying to wrestle sort of non-democratic powers for 2 years, that's what the coronavirus bill that was passed last week, or was it the week before now? I can't remember. But that's what
it was the week before bill, now. Yeah.
Yeah, they're asking for completely draconian powers for 2 years, and it was only on an amendment that there's a sort of 6-monthly review. But my understanding is that that's purely it's kind of window dressing, really. They've effectively got those powers, and they're extendable as well. Those powers, they've got them for 2 years and beyond, whatever they really want them to be. So we're in this very bizarre situation. I'm struggling to, if you presume that the British government is not somehow in the pay of some kind of shadowy New World Order or something, if you think they are sort of acting with any degree
Tory
of independence.
Party receives money from Huawei. Huawei is a Tory donor, just for example, just as an aside.
Yeah, sure. Sure. I mean, lots of lobbying companies will make donations one way or another, and not.
And they're also heavily connected with the Chinese state, Robin.
With foreign money, as you know. So if that is the case, Ollie, then that would have been disallowed by the Electoral Commission. So you'd need to have evidence of why that hasn't been refused. Remember the problem that the Lib Dems had a few years ago with that. So I'm not quite sure what the story is there, although that story's been floating around for a long time. But yeah, so look, if you think that the British government are acting independently, they have the freedom to do so. What are they up to? It doesn't seem, on the basis of the information that we've got, that they are behaving in a way that's consistent with that. There must be something more serious going on here.
I don't think badly, personally, frankly, of the government's handling of this matter over the course of the last couple of months. Prior to that, I think it was crazy that they didn't impose non-essential flight suspensions out of China as soon as Shanghai was quarantined. But that actually is almost by the by. It's kind of where we are now, and it's how this might be used against us. You bring up the coronavirus. Well, it's an act now, I guess, yeah? And as you say, draconian powers, you could argue that they're necessary. The question is, will we get our liberties back, given that the likes of Gordon Brown, Tony Blair, are now actively saying this needs to lead to a global government. That is the only way that we can be truly safe in the kind of world where we have this kind of pandemic. That's what they're saying.
Yeah. But I mean, you kind of expect that of Gordon Brown anyway, wouldn't you? I mean, he's a guy who stood up in the House of Commons and told us he'd saved the world, and then sort of retracted it the next second, sort of thing. But that's what he meant, because that's what he thinks he did in the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. So that's
it's frightening, though, isn't it? I mean, these are important figures, both on the Privy Council, for example. These are the kind of folks that essentially set out how we live, or at least they're whipped out at every opportunity by the mainstream media, apparently, because their views are important.
But I to be honest, I'm not sure they are. I mean, governance by consent is still necessary.
We don't have that now, though, do we? We don't even have parliamentary consent now, as you say, for quite possibly up to 2 years.
We've not closed down all communication. There is free communication currently. So if that changed, then we'd be in trouble. But that hasn't changed at the moment. So I think these things are not necessarily going to happen just because Gordon Brown says he wants world government.
Sure.
Tony Blair, I don't think it means anything in itself.
I think
the real concern is what is actually going on, because it doesn't. The actions, the preparation of the government to have put together a 300-page bill that went through Parliament, that was written before we were even taking any measures really in the UK, seems bizarre, does it not? And for them to have taken 2 years, or wanted to take unfettered 2 years worth of control, suggests that there's something else going on. There's not just a virus that appears to only affect older people and people with pre-existing conditions, blah blah blah, that sort of narrative. There's clearly something more serious going on.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the CGTN.com take on Henry Kissinger's op-ed for the Wall Street Journal the other day, just to give people a bit of a flavour of what was said in that. He proposed 3 steps, they say, that the US should do in a post-coronavirus world. The first being finding a cure or vaccine for the virus and developing new technologies for infection control. The second step is to heal the wounds to the world economy. He said the virus has unleashed the world economy at unprecedented speed globally, and the situation is more complex. Unlike anything ever known in history, the US should have plans to protect effects of upcoming chaos on the world's most vulnerable populations, he wrote. The third and last step, he noted, is to safeguard the principle of what he calls the liberal world order. The pandemic has prompted an anachronism, a revival of the walled city in an age when prosperity depends on global trade and movement of people. The world's democracies need to defend and sustain their Enlightenment values, that's the way he describes it, by continuing to provide security, order, economic well-being and justice, the fundamental needs of people, he wrote. A global retreat from balancing power with legitimacy will cause the social contract to disintegrate both domestically and internationally. Maybe I am reading a bit too much into it, I suppose you could argue, but just to go back on to his third point, to safeguard the principle of the liberal world order, I don't see anything liberal about globalism, I have to say. The pandemic has prompted an anachronism, a revival of the walled city in an age when prosperity depends on global trade and movement of people. At best, Robin, he isn't calling for analysis on what went wrong with basically this huge outbreak that came from a state that wasn't even being honest about it, and apparently who has the UN and the UN's department, the WHO, in its pocket. Where is the analysis on the safety, the actual safety of globalization, and questioning maybe the need for having nation states, not with more globalism, but with more democracy at a local level?
Sure. Well, there isn't. No, he's just talking about the economic problem that's coming, isn't he, as a result of what's going on, and saying that the solution, the great panacea is to have free movement across the globe and all that kind of thing. I don't think he's necessarily therefore advocating, one world government or anything like that. That's not.
He hasn't gone as far as the likes of Gordon Brown. No. Well,
I mean, Gordon Brown, in fact, hasn't gone as far as is being reported to be going. I mean, he's said that I think the furthest he went was to talk about executive powers to deal with the pandemic, but I don't think he talks about executive powers
on a global basis. In other words, or presumably at least using the auspices of the UN, which has failed.
I guess so. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we can carry on speculating about that. We don't really know what it amounts to. I think one of the problems with a lot of these things is there's a kind of presumption of evil, and I don't think that's necessarily the way to look at it. I think what tends to happen, it tends to be human nature almost for people to come up with ideologies based on some greater belief that they have some greater view of what works for the betterment of the populations of the world. And we've seen that with communism in the past, in particularly recent times. We've seen it with various different ideologies, haven't we? And I think what's likely is what's certain is there is a certain sort of ideology coming out of the practical problems of global population, sustainability, overuse of global resources, that sort of thing. And I think that the danger is that perhaps this is what we're seeing at the moment. Getting back to the original question, is either something that has been created in order to prompt a global change in economic activity. Because we are ultimately, if you accept any of the sort of arguments of those that say we are living unsustainably, what that means is that the predominantly capitalist system which runs the world is going to inevitably create a situation whereby we sow the seeds of our own ruin. That's really what the idea is, isn't it? And therefore you've got to change the economic system away from a predominantly capitalist incentivized system that incentivizes people to consume more than they need. What were the stats for I can't remember what the numbers were for back in the 18th century England. I think it was 7% of people worked on the land in food production. Sorry, 93% or something, and 7% did something else, and now it's the reverse of that. I mean, tell me if I'm getting boring, but I in my early career worked in IT, and so I got into IT and computers and everything very early on. And the idea with IT was, this is going to make everybody much more efficient, and we'll have a lot more leisure time, and we'll have a much higher quality of life as a result of that. And of course, that's just not economically how things work. Sure, we have a lot more of our economy is based on creating entertainment, and we do consume more entertainment rather than walking in the fields and listening to birdsong. But the fact is the economy is we've not got lots of people sitting around doing nothing. They're just not doing the basic things that we need to function as a society. It's not just creating shelter and creating food for themselves and others to consume. The great part of our economy is consuming some kind of resource to create a product that we don't need to function as human beings on the planet. And I think ultimately I can quite understand. I can quite understand why perhaps world leaders have found themselves in a position sitting in a room having a briefing from people at the UN or people who work with the sort of Greta Thunberg cataclysmist types who very convincingly put across a case that says this is the end of times. If we don't do something now, then we've got to change something. We've got to change things completely, otherwise the earth dies. I can quite believe that that's happened for very senior people in government.
Yeah, no, sure, absolutely. And it really is quite devastating for nations across the world. I'm just looking, for example, at a story coming out of RT yesterday. Spanish PM says EU survival is at stake in war against coronavirus as Spain becomes Europe's most infected nation. I'm based in Valencia in Spain, some of you know. As Spain becomes Europe's most infected country, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has sent a forceful message to Brussels, warning that the European Union will fail if it gets its handling of the COVID-19 crisis wrong. In a piece published in The Guardian on Sunday, the Spanish leader said that the outlook of his fervently pro-European government is being tested by the bloc's handling of the pandemic to date, which you might have noticed has been atrocious. And the Spaniards are now joining the Italians in calling for these corona bonds, which is essentially a bailing out of their economies, which have, as is the case in many other countries, shut down, but to a greater extent than most, and with weaker economies. Spain was technically bankrupt before this crisis even struck. And then you have the likes of Germany saying, no, we're not going to bail you out. We're not going to do that. Merkel so far. And that is the concern for the EU there, that how can they square this circle where you have the PIIGS, if you like, this disparity between those and the northern nations, Germany and the Netherlands and what have you. Just another example of how this is throwing the world order into chaos, Robin. Another story out of Spain, this time on MSN.com. Spanish government aims to roll out basic income soon. This is the universal basic income. Yeah, the Spanish government is working to roll out a universal basic income as soon as possible, as part of a battery of actions aimed at countering the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, according to Economy Minister Nadia Calvino. And let me see if I can find the pertinent quote from her. Here we go. The Spanish government's broader ambition is that basic income becomes an instrument that stays forever, that becomes a structural instrument, a permanent instrument. Quite incredible. So that tells me, Robin, that what we're seeing is so-called democracies. I don't remember ever having seen that in this government's manifesto, by the way, when they were running for office. Not that I personally vote in Spain. I vote in the UK. But I didn't see that. What we're seeing is that this coronavirus has far, far, far-reaching implications. And it seems to be that it's going to go one of two ways. Either the likes of Spain, Italy, what have you, are going to say, ciao, ciao, EU, go their own way, get their own currency back, devalue that, and attempt to be competitive on that basis. Else, it has to be greater international cooperation.
Well, yeah, I don't think the EU is going to support the corona bonds proposition without taking fiscal controls of Spanish, Italian, Greek, so on and so forth economies.
Yeah, I think you're right.
As is usual, they'll build their power base out of crisis, and that would be so. So what I mean is by fiscal controls, i.e., a much greater degree of tax and spend controls, because really they don't have any taxation controls apart from on tariffs and VAT. Those are really the only kind of taxation resources of taxation that the EU get as income. And really, in order to be a European government, they need to have the majority of the tax take and the majority of the spend. Otherwise, they just don't really have the power to the direct extent that I think is the ultimate aim, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, but and the question really will be, because the politics in Germany have changed so much recently, whether or not the Germans want to entertain that, because Germany, can probably survive this thing.
Yeah, Germany's doing very well.
I saw some reports today that they are looking at.
Well, I say that
loosening things up by the end of the month, sort of thing. So I don't know if that's true, but that's. I think the real problem I feel at the moment, and I don't know if you feel this as well, Ollie, but I feel like I've got to caveat everything I say and everything I think, because I just do not know what to believe and what not to believe.
Yeah,
we're in this insane situation where we are in conspiracy theory gone mad world. And one thing we know about conspiracists is they love to conspire. And people who like conspiracies, and I'm a little bit like that myself. I like to sort of think outside the box, think a bit more laterally than possibly people might be expected to generally.
I don't. But I've got no time for conspiracy theorists at all, as well you know.
Sure, absolutely, Ollie. That's probably the biggest lie I've heard all week. But
honest Gov. No, carry on, please.
But you know what I mean. It's but now we're in a situation where it's like, well, anything's feasible, isn't it? Almost. It could be aliens. This, it's I'm not. I shouldn't think we should at least entertain the conversation about we've been taken over by aliens for 10 minutes, because I can really. Maybe
we have.
I'm looking for sane explanations, and there isn't one, is there, really, for what's going on? Not just what we're told is going on, but for the circumstances in terms of the way in which different governments around the world are behaving in terms of all this stuff with the EU. And the bottom line is, with the EU, are the Germans going to even be vaguely interested in supporting the southern European states in exchange for not them but the EU having tax and spend powers? I'm struggling with that one.
Well, I'm not sure that it's up to the Germans. Not sure that I certainly don't think it's up to the German people any more that it had the last Parliament had its way. Then the question of Brexit would have been up to the British people, despite the fact that they were promised.
It's very true.
By subsequent,
yeah, it's very true. But ultimately, that's going to come crashing down, isn't it? If they attempt to do that, will they get away with it in Germany? I don't think so. So if you think all possibility of governance by consent is gone, then yeah, sure, anything's possible.
Well, at the moment it has, Robin, and that's my worry. That's the worry of people like Peter Hitchens and Lord. Is it Assumption?
I don't know. Yeah, the Supreme Court guy. No, I don't know how you pronounce it. No,
Lord Sumption.
Lord Sumption. Okay. Thank you, Boozy, and I'll bring you in just a second, sir. But these are, I think, valid concerns, just given the legislative landscape as it stands, and as you say, what to trust. I don't even know what a conspiracy theory is anymore, because the media told us it was basically everybody online. Now they're telling us to trust China. It just beggars belief. Boozy, what's your take on this, sir? Are you holed down in California?
Yeah, I'm in California. Just slightly concerned that my governor has said that we need to use the situation to our advantage to usher in a new progressive era.
He said what?
We need to take advantage of the situation to to alter the politics and the economics to usher
He
in a
wants a
new
more
progressive era.
progressive world, in inverted commas, yeah? Your
Progressive
Californian.
era, which would be harking back to the
It's Kissinger again, isn't it?
totalitarianism of FDR. Governments from people like FDR, Lyndon Johnson, stuff like that.
Right. So,
which was kind of the last great period of the Democrats, if you exclude JFK. But then JFK, they didn't particularly like his. He was kind of an anti-democrat, standing for it as a Democrat. So, yeah.
Right. Do you see because that any kind of, if you like, attempt to use this in the kind of way that maybe Kissinger is hinting at, you would think is going to be literally trumped by the president, who a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, said globalization is dead. That we see from coronavirus, he said that we do need borders and we do have to be self-sufficient, not sufficient in any way on any other nation state. He said that. That completely flies in the face of the kind of the concerns, if you like, the globalist concerns that I open up this show with today, no?
Yeah, but what we've also got to bear in mind is that the coastal globalist Democrats are now trying to are establishing at this moment, as we speak, a committee with subpoena power where they're going to effectively look to try to impeach the president again and try and kick him out of office over his handling of the coronavirus, which
really
actually arguably has been probably one of the better ways that any nation has dealt with this. And if yesterday they were talking about how we're going to face the next week or two are going to be the worst weeks. And Trump said that's the light at the end of the tunnel. There is a bit of hidden messaging in that. As you know, when we talk about
Fauci said the same. I watched that last night, and Fauci defended the president's stance.
When you look at the state by state stats, and that I saw some charting, and based on the evidence that they have, and they gradiated the colors and over a time period, and from like yellow to red, and white to red going through yellow. But they basically looked at it, and the dark red colors were the greatest ratio of deaths per those infected. And what you can see from them is different states and having their peaks. But all of them, I mean, every single state had gone out of the red and was going back down was as almost like when you looked at it, you could only say this is this is the starting of a flattening of the curve. And
yeah, but it's very hard to trust any of the figures anyway.
I know it's hard to trust the statistics, but if this is the statistics they're going from, the statistics they're releasing, then that says that we're coming in America, and
Yeah.
I'm
Next
looking
2
at
weeks,
I'm looking at
bad,
the stats.
then improving.
It's looking like it's improving, not getting worse.
Yeah,
Now,
sure. Given a 2.5
in
week period window, I think was the answer. Okay,
yeah,
thanks, thanks,
and
Boozy.
this is
Wrap up.
my thing. I am concerned, if I may quote Ben Franklin, because I think that's very important when we're talking about this. Those that would trade liberty for safety will get neither.
Yeah.
And and I do think
I don't know
we
that
need.
he encountered a pandemic when he said that.
Yeah, but I think we do need to consider. All it takes is 1 month to normalize. When we look at societal structures, when you change something, it only takes 1 month for that to become the accepted norm, and that is of concern because if we start,
Sorry. What's that proposition?
if you change the fundamental makeup of a society and it continues for a period of a month, it becomes an accepted norm.
According to you, or
no, according to sociological research, that when you start changing things, it becomes, people don't tend to fight against a structure after a period of a month if it holds sway. Now, if we continue to have dystopian draconian policies, one, the people will find it more palatable,
They get used to it.
those in political office will find it more, will like the taste of that level of power, and it is harder to get out of those situations when we've seen, things have to, we're starting to live into a Yarvol situation.
Boozy, thank you. Let me ask Robin about that. Thank you, Chris. I do appreciate that. That is, I suppose, that's a very key point, really. Are we not in danger, Robin, of having a boiling frog syndrome on the one hand, i.e. people getting used to their incarceration or lack of liberty, whatever, and on the other hand, lust for power?
Well, you could argue that from the Second World War, that we had it for 6 years in this country, and that we didn't have that problem. So your month theory, I'm afraid, is just blown out of the water on that basis. However, you could argue that the aftermath of the Second World War in the UK gave us a far more sort of socialist way of governing ourselves as a country than we'd had prior to that, which would sort of, lean back in the direction of that. I think it's just a bit too absolute to say that, you change things and a month later it's just, you can't reverse them. That's not.
I'm not saying you can't reverse them. What I'm saying is that it become the mental processes of people, they become more, they find it more amenable. They will accept it more. And what we also have to bear in mind is, in the aftermath of World War II, there were a number of liberties we did lose. And people were more concerned, because of the period of rationing that we had, people were more concerned about what they were eating and let go a number of liberties that we did have, which were taken away from us, which actually are fundamental liberties, one of which some people may not think is important, but the firearm rights that we had in the UK. But those rights are highly fundamental when you consider, if we had continued to have governments like May's or governments like Blair's, where basically what the people wanted and what the people were calling for was completely ignored, and and they were just paying lip service to these things, but going on and doing what they so wished. And even at a point where we've been considering problems with Brexit in the UK, where you had a corrupt judiciary, a corrupt legislative, which were preventing us having it, and it was down purely to the executive that forcing things through. If we'd had a corrupt executive that was refusing to push it through, democracy would have failed, and at that point, the only option would have been to remove the government. And if democracy's failed, you can't vote them out, which means you have to take them out. And if you remove, that's why the fundamental rights of the citizenry to be armed is there to be a check balance to prevent the abuse of the politic and the governors, those that govern us, so that if they don't dare take away our democratic rights and the rights of the people, because they know that if they do, the people have the ability to take them out in a more literal way. And those rights were taken out piece by piece. It wasn't just dumb blame. It wasn't just the dumb blame. They started post in the in-between war years, and it was a gradualized thing that that British people lost their gun rights.
Okay, Robin,
and this is a serious thing about civil liberties.
Chris, you're going round in circles. I hear what you say. And I think Robin's heard what you have to say as well. Let me take a few comments, and then I'm going to move on a little bit. Amanda Rolfson says, World Government Meeting. Sent to you, Ollie, and your messages on Facebook. The WHO members from UN, the WHO, WTO, IMF, Financial Times, anyway, something in my inbox. Thank you, Amanda. Carlos, I haven't had the chance to check it out yet. That's a message to Amanda. Tanis Pullen, I read China bulk ordered 200,000 body bags. How true, I've no idea, which is largely part of the problem we have. What we do
why would the biggest manufacturer in the world order body bags from somewhere else? I mean, that, come on.
Maybe that's the Chinese government ordered from a Chinese company.
No, there was this ridiculous story that China had ordered 200,000 body bags from Taiwan. I mean, this is a gullibility test.
Yeah, no, they wouldn't have done that.
If you believe that, then you will believe anything.
They would probably like to send 2 million body bags to Taiwan.
They would probably like 200,000 full. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that would be. Yeah. Blimey. Sorry, I'm trying to read your comments. Amanda Rolfson also says the EU are finished. If people do not wake up to what this group is all about, they will never learn. I think we largely know. Sam JP says, from what I've been following, absolutely anything is possible. Really strange times we're in. Why have we been silenced about talking about the virus and 5G? Well, Sam, I think a lot of people are talking about that. But again, it's very, very difficult. It's a little bit like this whole global warming thing. And somebody like, I don't know, Greta Thunderbollocks or whatever her name is, comes out and says she reckons she knows it all. She's barely got any O-levels. And she reckons she knows everything about climate change. I don't know what's going on, frankly. I don't know how many ologies you would need. And I think that something like 5G, probably you have to, have various ologies to understand that as well. I do wonder. There have been some 5G masts set ablaze over the last couple of days, I've noticed, which is quite fun. But I don't know whether it's got anything to do with coronavirus. And I'll tell you something about just that point. Iran doesn't have any 5G. Africa, the vast majority of it, at least, as far as I'm aware, doesn't have any 5G. I'm just saying, I don't know if people are conflating. We've got enough concerns with what people do say, the likes of, Gordon Brown, who has said what he said, for example, And then we've got one of his cohorts, Keir Starmer, the kind of character that basically gave Jimmy Savile a pass, or that turned a blind eye entirely to the rape, torture, stroke murder gangs, becoming leader of the Labour Party now. Another Blairite, yeah? We've got enough problems as it is that are absolutely factual with some of these dodgy characters. Charles Spencer says if the army is called onto the streets of London, it will be normal for them. They're used to working in a foreign country. Right, okay. Robin, I understand that you've put together a video on world population growth and what's going on with that. I want to talk a little bit about that with you. So let me see if I can pull that up and show people this video. So I hope you can hear this, folks.
The population of the world, our planet, has increased substantially in the last 500 years. In the year 1500, the world population was approximately 590 million people. By the year 1800, it was 1 billion. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, the global population had started to expand more rapidly, and then, after the Second World War, it exploded to more than 6 billion by the turn of the last century, expanding steadily thereafter. The burning question was asked: how many people could our planet sustain? In 2004, the results of nearly 70 studies on this question were collated and used to generate a meta-estimate of 7.7 billion, the global sustainable limit of human population, the maximum number of souls our planet could support before irreplaceable overconsumption would trigger a process which, without intervention, would ultimately destroy our planet, our only viable home. Estimates conclude that we reached that 7.7 billion in 2019, the year in which COVID-19 was released. By March 2020, the global population was estimated to have reached 7.8 billion. Is it coincidence that COVID-19 now threatens the lives of so many and will, in all likelihood, change the structure of the global economy? The questions that this provokes are profound, and we will seek answers. To participate, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on social media. Thank you.
Right. Well, that was cheery, wasn't it? So now, Robin, you sound like the conspiracy theorist. We actually reached, as I understand it, that sustainable limit. I think you said it last year. No?
Yeah, that's right. Well, there are various different bodies that come up with figures, but they're all sort of fairly similar. And the idea of that was not to necessarily suggest a particular theory around it, but was, as it says, it provokes questions, really, doesn't it? Because there is a coincidence, and I just when I was trying to get my head around what's going on with this whole thing, I just sort of stepped back from it and thought, well, what is the big trend? And the big trend over the last 10, 15 years, particularly, is we're all being told repeatedly that we're destroying the planet and that we've got to do something, and it's desperate that we've got to do something because our planet's going to be uninhabitable, and you have Greta Thunberg flying around the world telling everybody this. Yet, realistically, what are we doing? Not a great deal. Do you know what I mean? We're not actually doing anything, and that's why these sort of these people get more and more shrill. Now, I'm not suggesting.
Go on.
I'm not suggesting I particularly accept or don't accept their premise, but the fact is it appears to be an ever-increasing number of people who subscribe to that.
I've also seen academics rolled out on stage at, I don't know, TED Talks or whatever, saying that the curve is evening off. That's right. The global, and that we can sustain up to something like 11 billion, I've heard, in any case. And that, but by the time we did or would, we shouldn't be trusting models, apparently, according to the model from Imperial College, which is basically told, I don't know, which is set government policy. But my point is that that some of the theories I've seen, or some of the modelling I've seen, has suggested that we can tackle the population growth. And along with education, and I don't know, tell the Catholics to bloody well shut up and stop being so bloody stupid or something. Sorry, the Pope or whatever about condoms. And on the other hand, if we farm properly, I mean, you said yourself there was a lot more farming going on than there is now.
Well, yeah, okay. I mean, there are lots of counter arguments.
Yeah.
All I was trying to do was say, okay, what's the big trend here? What's going on? We know there's been this sort of big kind of problem of saying of lots of people on the kind of environmental debate side of the debate saying, look, this is unsustainable. We need to do something. We need to get governments to do something. Well, that's okay. Well, what do they actually believe is the population limit? Therefore, was my question, because I hadn't really looked at it very far. And I started looking into the question, and I discovered that there had been this study in 2004, which wasn't a new study as such. It had taken all the previous studies up until that point, and kind of synthesized them all into a kind of an average result, if you like. So to try and, it's a bit like the wisdom of crowds, isn't it? The idea that if you take all of the different views into account and you average them out, then actually you get pretty close to what is objectively the right answer. That's kind of the theory of the wisdom of crowds, which in practice kind of works out.
Yeah.
And so effectively that's what's happened with this particular report, which came to the conclusion of 7.7 billion. How strange that we happen to have exactly hit that number at the moment of release of COVID-19. It just seems like an extraordinary coincidence. To an extent, it's worthy of trying to investigate where that goes. And it's been quite interesting over the last week or so, or actually 3 or 4 days since I put that out, middle of last week, I think. That some people think it's there's an intentional human intervention by a particular group, and then the question is, which group is it? Is it the Chinese? Is it the globalists? Is it Trump doing it? And other people say no, it's Mother Earth, and other people say no, it's God, and so on and so forth. And
right.
So it's quite interesting. But I don't think at the moment we haven't sort of gone a long way beyond that. I mean, what's really interesting about the report is it was put together by a Dutch guy who subsequently became part of a thing called the Academia Europa, which is the scientific body, rather like the Royal Academy in the UK, advises the European Union. So the European Union, being essentially a globalist organisation, it would appear is taking advice from this guy through that organisation. Is that, and this is the piece I haven't managed to piece together. I don't know how influential that particular report was. It seems to have the authority of the right sort of people to be very influential, but I haven't managed to find a particular sort of connection there to confirm that. We've just got that coincidence in terms of numbers. But if what we're looking at the moment is some kind of deliberate intervention, that's a viable possibility. And I think at the moment, as we are exploring all possibilities, we should explore that one too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's yeah, no, it is an interesting coincidence, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know what to say, except that it's quite depressing.
Yeah, what's also interesting is you've got the Indian government has actually raised paperwork on the Chinese government at the International Court for basically subjecting the world to this and basically looking to effectively sue them for money, and a lot of countries are going full. The interesting thing on an American angle is that while it's not being talked about, they're talking a little bit about this, but they're not going into what charges or anything like that. I'm getting a bit of information from some people, but
well, hold on a sec. You carry just
Dr.
one sec.
Lieber.
Boozy, just before you carry on, I want you to carry on with this because it is fascinating, but I can read a story quickly for people to get an idea of what's going on. According to Express last night, China must pay Britain £351 billion in coronavirus damages. Report calls for the UN to step in. So this is going on around the world. Boris Johnson should pursue China for a coronavirus compensation package worth $351 billion, according to a leading report into the global health crisis. An investigation by the Henry Jackson Society has concluded China could have mitigated the worldwide economic impact of COVID-19 and indicated there is evidence the Chinese government breached international healthcare responsibilities. The British Foreign Policy think tank estimates the spread of coronavirus, which has infected more than 1 million people globally, they reckon, has cost the G7 group of nations, including the UK, US and Japan, a huge £3.2 trillion. The report, which is published tomorrow and has been seen by the Mail on Sunday, outlined a number of possible legal avenues, including going to the UN and International Court of Justice. Please carry on, Chris.
Yeah, the interesting bit that I'm hearing, they've arrested obviously, we are aware of the arrest of Dr. Lieber from Harvard University, who was working with two Chinese scientists, one of which was a lieutenant in the Red Army. And that
happened about 2.5 months ago. That did happen, according to the mainstream media. Anyway,
one of the ones that went, the other one, not the lieutenant in the Red Army, was intercepted by federal agents trying to leave the country with vials of COVID-19. And they're saying biological samples are in the news, but it was actually COVID-19. This is where, some people are trying to blame it on the US. Oh, it was made in the US.
Chinese are saying that.
Yeah, the US. Yeah, the Chinese are obviously claiming that. However, one of what I'm hearing through some of my back channels are that one of the charges that they're looking at on placing on Dr. Lieber is treason for aiding and abetting an enemy. So they're looking at actually.
When does that go to court, Chris? Any idea?
I don't know. I know that the guy is basically incarcerated right now and he's not getting out. They basically said no bail for him.
A lot of people, Robin, coming back to this possible population reduction plan, conspiracy theory, whatever, is that I don't know. I mean, we're told that this is some bloke at his ratty-batty soup or whatever. Then there's this theory that it came out of a laboratory, a bioweapons laboratory. There are these stories that this virus was originally conjured up, some sort of hocus pocus or whatever in the US, and then it went over to China and they developed it further in Wuhan, and it may have escaped from the lab or it may have deliberately left the lab. Who knows? But there are people out there saying that they thought this thing would be more serious, more devastating than it has been. I know you can't give me a 100% answer on this, just as I can't give you any answers either. But it is curious, isn't it? It is curious. It does make you wonder if this virus was expected to be bigger and more of a killer, more deadly than it has been, wasn't. And as a result of that, they seem to be massaging the figures to the extent that, for example, the CDC, the Centre for Disease Control, the stateside agency to government, the kind of equivalent of the WHO over there, if you like, has put out an alert in the last on the 22nd of March, I think it was, saying if somebody you think they might have had COVID-19 when they died, then put that on the death certificate. Whether or not they did, it doesn't matter. We'll do the investigation afterwards. But by the way, as a caveat...
No, that's not what it says. That's not what it is.
It is what it says.
No, it's not.
Contributory factor.
No, it's not. I've read the document. That's not what it says.
Go on, I'll put it up too.
If it was a contributory factor, then
yes.
COVID-19 can go on the document. We've always known that's what the figures were. The media in this country have always reported not people dying of, people dying with. You know, there's no...
And people are just assuming that is they died because they had COVID-19.
No, I mean that's
the way it's being portrayed.
If people are, yeah. The difficulty you've got is a political problem with that. People are, as Toby Young came up with this last week, didn't he? Created a lot of controversy over this by starting to talk about what is the value of human life. And we do have a formula. We have a formula in the UK, which is that NICE, which is the body that works out whether or not the NHS can use particular drugs for treatments, has a particular figure, and the figure is roughly 30,000 quid for every additional year of life that could be brought, that somebody could experience by using a particular type of treatment. If it doesn't fall within that 30,000-ish quid, if it's more expensive, then it doesn't get on the books. Basically, we don't have it available to the NHS. So we're very much in a position of working out the value of human life in the UK. Sorry, Ollie, did you want to?
Well, yeah. No, first of all, I just want to be absolutely clear on what the alert from the CDC does say. This is from the actual alert itself. Should COVID-19 be reported on the death certificate only with a confirmed test, ? COVID-19 should be reported on the death certificate for all decedents where the disease caused or is assumed to have caused or contributed to death. Now, that is a very, very flaky diagnosis that you're going to get off the back of that. And now, they also say that there's another part of this new code which says that where the cause of death is uncertain, there will be a laboratory confirmation off the back of it. But because laboratory test results, I'm quoting, are not typically reported on death certificates in the US, NCHS is not planning to implement those statistics for mortality statistics. In other words, we are going to pretend that these people died as a result of this, irrespective of whether or not they actually did.
Yeah.
Well, you just made a leap. No, you've made a leap there, Ollie. That's not what it says. Hold on, Chris, please. I am only making the leap that the media is making. No. That's not. It doesn't say that they'll be counting the figures if they don't know. That's not what it says. It says if, as it says later on in the document, it says if it's contributory, then it goes on the numbers. That's the problem that people are identifying, because they're saying this is not the of COVID-19, it's the with COVID-19. But that's kind of inevitable, because that it's going to be reported in this way, for the simple reason that a virus by its nature will always take those who are ill have very limited immune system first.
Yes, that is true.
That's
absolutely
how it works.
true.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be. We'd be if we'd sort of said, well, what are we supposed to do? Otherwise, we're supposed to say, oh well, anybody who's got, even if they've got a light cold, it's not COVID then, because if they'd have been in perfect rude health, they'd be fine.
Well, here
that doesn't work either, does it? So you have to have some basis of measurement which is consistent. We're talking. By the way, I don't think people necessarily know what the document we're talking about, but you're talking about the US system, aren't you, for recording?
I am. I'm talking about the Centre for Disease Control. I've just linked the document in the comments, so people can take a look at it. All I'm saying, and actually to come into the question that I wanted to ask you about the theory of population control, if you like, is that the statistics, and I would say they are, you very, very welcome to disagree with me, are being massaged to support the whole, if you like, fear factory that's going on globally, chucked out there by this wonderful globalist voice box, the mainstream media, and then we are seeing these draconian laws being rolled out around the world off the back of it. Now, I'm not saying that they are not necessary in the short term. My concern, as I said at the outset of this show, is that they are going to be retained in the long term. But so far as your statistics with regards the human population is concerned, again, could it not be the case that maybe they were expecting COVID-19 to be a little bit more effective finishing us off, or taking out more than it has done, or whatever, to, as Dickens said,
I don't know. I mean,
population.
If this is a deliberate act of a particular group putting out COVID-19 for a particular purpose, I would think the main purpose would have been to change the economic system. If it's based around if it's got a kind of environmental background to it, that would be the main purpose of it.
Yeah.
The reason that governments are choosing to elevate it in the way that they are, and it is elevated by the simple problem that you've got in terms of reportage, because otherwise, what do you do? I mean, how do you determine somebody having died of COVID-19 exclusively? If somebody is in perfectly good health, the fact is you're not going to get decent numbers that are going to justify the sort of action that is required very quickly until it's too late. That's the problem. So that's, I think, if you or I were in government and we were faced with the scenario as it has been, the mathematics of the scenarios it's been put across, we would be doing exactly what the government is.
Yes, I think so.
We would be saying we're going to measure deaths with, the numbers are going to be horribly high. People will see, though.
I don't know about that.
And have seen, for example, in Italy and Spain. I mean, look, you've had what, 13,000 with deaths. You had how many deaths yesterday in Spain?
It came down. It was about 680, 674, something like that.
Yeah, but way, way above. I mean, the UK, on average, across the last 5 years, on average, per day, we've had 46 flu deaths per day for the last 5 years. Okay, now that goes in peaks and troughs, and that would be mainly from, I think, around October, November to January, February time that most people would have died. But over the year, 46. Clearly, it's not like flu. Yeah, but it took a while for it to get over those numbers.
Let me just chip in an interjection there, because again, I have suspicions, because again, that CDC website, which I've been poring over a little bit over the last few weeks, they report on the flu mortality rate in the States. And the last recorded season was about 2 years ago. And there were 220,000 cases of recorded cases of flu, regular flu, of which there were 22,000 deaths. A very convenient statistics from the point of view of my crap maths is 10% mortality rate. And this thing is actually, perhaps less than that. Flu has gone down in the mortality rate by the sounds of it.
The mortality rate is not. The mortality rate doesn't really. It's not really relevant to this. I mean, we're not talking about mortality rate. We're talking about numbers of death by a particular cause. So in the UK, it was 70. The annual amount was 17,000 flu deaths per year, which averages out over 365 days to 46 a day. When you've got
my point, though, Robin, just to finish my point, is that I wonder how many of these deaths, these coronavirus deaths, are being misdiagnosed, and they're actually not the contributory factor. And I agree with you. Yeah, COVID-19, sure, it would be. It would exacerbate whatever else underlying concerns. But I wonder how many of these deaths are actually just from regular flu,
or the other way around, Ollie. Mm-hmm. All of these, there are many from other causes of death that are COVID, but they haven't been tested, so they don't know.
Yes.
Because look at this.
Then we got people being declared dead from COVID without being tested for it.
Well, you've got people who've been declared dead of pneumonia who haven't been tested for COVID and have been put down as have died of pneumonia. So you haven't got consistency in the numbers. You can't claim that
none of the statistics that we have are not valid statistics, because they do not use there is no consistency in the way that they are being recorded, and there is no valid explanation being given as to what is going to be recorded as this and what isn't, because different places are doing it differently, and because how the CDC's worded this as well, it's also leaving a lot of wiggle room and a lot of movement for the doctors to record it. Yes, because if they don't have to test you to record you as a COVID-19 death, and there isn't enough COVID-19 tests to test people, I've been put off of work because I had symptoms of COVID-19, not being tested because I don't have enough symptoms. Okay, they're rationing the tests. Are you going to use a test for someone who's died, or are you going to use a test for someone who is alive and has got serious conditions? If you've got a ration, I'm not going to use a test on someone who's already gone, because it's just wasting a test.
Yeah, exactly. That's what the CDC is saying. Yeah,
exactly. Yes, that's wasting a test, which means you're not testing someone, so you're making it up. It's Jackanory. Because you don't know if they've ever had that. If you don't know it's in their bloodstream, and they're asymptomatic for COVID-specific symptoms for COVID-19, but you're recording people. There's people who have fallen. Okay, there's people who've fallen off of ladders and died.
Where's this information?
They're being tested. Those people have been tested, found to have COVID-19 in their body, and they've put it down as a COVID-19 test when they fell and cracked their head open. There are actually evidential. There are stories coming out where these things are happening. People who are dying have got stage 4 cancer, who have been given days, then they're dying.
Hang on. You can't have it both ways.
COVID-19 deaths.
You're just contradicting what you've just said, mate.
I'm saying that sometimes they're being tested, sometimes not. I personally would not test anyone who's died if I've got a ration thing, but some doctors are testing, some aren't. There is no normality. There is no standard process, and no standard process means the statistical figures are complete hokum. They're complete BS. You can't trust them because
Chris, let Robin interrogate you, please.
Yeah, of course, we know that. We know the figures aren't reliable. That's why the CDC have issued that advisory, I think, isn't it, to explain how they want the data captured. Whilst you don't have full testing, you're not going to know, because you're not going to know how many people have got it. You're not going to know about the herd immunity stuff. Oh, none of that. It's all. I mean, and that's why we're stuck in the situation we are at the moment. I mean, in the UK, I don't know about the US. I imagine it's fairly similar, but in the UK, the whole motive for this thing is to try and give the National Health Service enough time to gear up, to deal with the problem. And if we had too much spreading of the thing, then we wouldn't be in a position to be able to deal with it in hospitals. The problem we've got at the moment is that despite all the despite all the gearing up, we don't appear to have anything like enough ventilators or oxygen, even, it would appear now, to be able to deal with it. So God knows how we're going to get out of this bloody corner. By looking at it, I'm not as in touch with what's going on in the US, but I think, am I right in saying you basically got the same problem? You haven't got enough ventilators, is that right?
Well, part of the problem is a lot of this stuff is state level responsibility,
right?
And a lot the big problem areas, which are actually all Democrat controlled, are what's happened is they have not maintained, they've not built up, they've sold off all of their disaster supplies. So they've not had, didn't have the things like the ventilators, they have all these kind of things. Like California, for example, disaster every 5 minutes, potentially. We're all waiting for the next big disaster, be it hurricane, earthquake, pandemic, whatever. So we are what was responsibility of the states is to have these supplies there so that they can turn them out, and when they use them, replace them, etc., etc. What's happened in a lot of these states is they've completely dropped the ball on this. They've got rid of their supplies. They've not replaced them. They've done nothing because they want to spend their money on their pet socialist projects. And then now they're complaining that the federal government hasn't got the stuff for them, when the federal government's now having to work with industry to try and say, come on, we need you to build these things really quickly so that we can mop up the mess that these states have led us in.
Actually,
but in the same point, the federal government didn't replace its own supplies under Obama and Bush, where both of them used stuff for disasters and then didn't rebuild it. And Biden was actually in charge of the H1N1 when they had all these ventilators that all these things that got used up, couldn't be used anymore. All these masks, everything like that.
So you're making an anti-democratic political point out of this. I think it is bipartisan. And actually, well, Chris's point is not bipartisan, but I think the problem is, it seems to me, ironically maybe, the US and the EU has got a very, very similar problem here, which is born of federal systems, where the EU or the United States itself are supposed to be, if you like, backing up the individual nation states or the states. And the states have done their own different things or not done them because, for whatever reasons, probably because they didn't have the money or wanted to spend the money on something else. And not dissimilar with be it the EU or the US. And it's the same in the UK. We haven't got the masks or whatever. But then again, you kind of just, nobody expected this. I don't think, you're not making any political point over this, really, are you, Chris? In fairness, we are where we are.
Well, there is actually a valid thing, because what we are seeing state-wise is that Republican states are handling this a lot better because they have got the resources, because they have made these preparations. Like Florida, for example, has only just gone into lockdown, but when you actually look at Florida's figures, it's where it actually does have a lot of flights into it, which is an aggravating factor. Florida actually has a number is with its curve. Its curve has basically flattened without the lockdown coming into force. So you're looking at other places where they're having to do these things to try and get the place get things in place
Yeah.
just because they failed to prepare. And
okay,
in
fair
California
enough.
California has no excuse for not preparing because of all the risks of disasters that we have specific to California. California is always a disaster waiting to happen. To be blunt,
okay, point made. Look, I want to just get on to last question really, because we're running out of time. But before I do, I want to take a few comments. I will just say though that it has sickened me, and maybe if briefly, gentlemen, you'd like to come back on this, it sickens me how this crisis has been politicized, quite aside from this whole globalist concern that I have personally or whatever. Maybe I'm wrong, or maybe it won't happen because the power of the people will come through. My God, I hope so. But that aside, the way that, for example, I have seen the left, particularly, giving Trump a really, really hard time over this. And in fairness to the guy, he was one of the very first that said, let's stop non-essential Chinese flights. Still a shed load of folks came into the United States from China over the last couple of months or so, it has to be said. But nonetheless, he did seem to run with the ball a bit more than most. And it does seem a little bit unfair, the politics that has been played over that. Or am I wrong, Robin?
I don't know. We won't know until the final analysis is the truth of it, isn't it?
We won't know until the final analysis, but we do know. I mean, we see, for example, Biden now, Joe Biden, presidential nominee for November or whenever, if that happens, saying that Trump has been really, really lackadaisical with the curfew, with the quarantining and what have you, despite the fact that it is a federal system and it is really up to the governors in each state. And also, despite the fact that on Chinese New Year, when we saw what was going on with Wuhan, and people like me, anybody that was looking at my wall, saw that there were some of us at least that were talking about the concerns of this great big migration going on around China and what have you, amidst this quarantine. It was on the brink of quarantine, I think, at that stage in Wuhan. That you've got a video of Nancy Pelosi telling everybody to go out and celebrate Chinese New Year. And anyway, that's I do think. Look, I'm just going to take a few comments, and then I want to get on to a last point. What does this mean for Brexit? And so a few. Carlos says, if you get killed in a car crash, it will be classed as a COVID-19 death. William Davis, if he don't get his way, he leave the studio. I don't know who he's talking about. Probably all of us. I don't know. Anne Jones, an online video yesterday of a New York doctor stating that using ventilators is the wrong treatment because it puts too much strain on the lungs. Kenneth Noel Curran, Dracula, 1984. A Brave New World, inviting Dante's Inferno. Tu ne cede malis. Blimey, Kenneth, you've got more confidence in my Latin than me. Is that even Latin? Amanda Thompson says he's pointing out who was responsible for replacing them. Not his fault, which party they belong to. I think scolding me there, Amanda. Okay, Slam JP, are there any earthquakes happening in California at the moment, Chris? Well, they had about 100 over the weekend, didn't they? Including
there is never not an earthquake happening in California. We tend to have the low-level Richter scale. That we have thousands of earthquakes a day. Most of them you wouldn't even notice because they are very small ones. But we had a one that you can start feeling not far up in Temecula, which is about an hour and a half drive from me. That sort of area was about 4.9, but even though that's for California, that's still kind of a reasonably small one. We tend not to get worried until it goes above 6 in California. That's because if we were to worry about every earthquake, but this is the thing because.
Okay. All right, Chris, not talking about earthquakes today. Thank you very much indeed. I want to know, before we leave, gentlemen, what does this mean Robin, please, from the Great Brexit Debate. What does it mean for Brexit?
Well, I think the key issue that is of concern at the moment amongst people like me in the UK who have campaigned long and hard for Brexit is whether or not the extension will hold to December 31st or whether it will be extended.
Yes.
I think there's a bit of concern this week that an ex-MP, Nick Dubois, who was Dominic Raab, the current Foreign Secretary's Chief of Staff when he was at the Department for Exiting the EU, Nick Dubois came out in the Times yesterday or Sunday, yesterday, saying that he supported changing the transition period or extending the transition period beyond December the 31st. I think, that's the big concern. I think it would be very foolish to do so. I think in some ways there's probably a better argument for bringing it forward than moving it back, for the simple reason that when we finally get out of this kind of lockdown period, there is going to be economic devastation on an unprecedented scale.
Yes.
Why on earth would we want to go through two adjustment periods? One, trying to get the economy back on the road, and then later on having potentially another period of adjustment. Let's just get to one new normal, and it's not very complex as far as the EU are concerned. It is, here's an FTA agreement. We've already drafted an FTA agreement for them. Do you want it or not?
Free trade agreement.
And if that means that we're getting, that we're I mean, what it looks like we are going to do. I mean, I'm sort of reading the political runes at the moment. I think the real debate that's going on, is we're trying to get some reliable numbers on the stats for what is the death rate, what is the death profile for people of particular ages and that sort of thing. And it comes down to these incredibly difficult political decisions to be made, which are, when do you reach a point where you close down the economy to such an extent that the subsequent deaths that you cause as a result of closing down the economy exceed what you would have had to bear as a result of a virus? Yeah. So whatever is the better route is ultimately the one that should be taken. That's a very difficult thing to do politically. And that's possibly why the government need the sort of powers they've got at the moment to be able to make those difficult decisions. Because I cannot see how we can function as an economy for very long unless we do all go back to work, apart from those people who are high risk. But the problem is we don't know how to determine high risk exactly at the moment. Am I high risk? I had childhood asthma. I don't need to use an inhaler. Well, I think once in the last 3 months, But I don't know how high risk. If I get it, am I dead? I don't know. And so at the moment, I think I think Chris thought, and maybe I disagree with him. No, I don't. I agree the stats are crap at the moment. And that's why the decision making, it's very difficult to make the right decisions about that at the moment. And I think we're just kind of hanging out and hoping that we're going to have a way of doing the tests, doing antibody tests, finding out if the antibody tests work. Because even in South Korea, where they've had the best results in terms of containing this, the people over there are saying, the problem is people that we thought had developed the antibodies are still coming back and wind up in hospital a couple of months later. So we don't know if even those people who supposedly have got antibodies and immunity, therefore, have actually got it. It seems they haven't.
Those tests are going out soon, aren't they? What are they called, those tests?
Sorry, I don't know the phrase. It hasn't stuck in my brain, but I know what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, there's another bunch of tests that they can chuck out. Fauci was talking about it last night at the press conference, the coronavirus press conference in the White House, saying that I think it's antibody tests. I think. And when they put those out, they will have some figures which are more definitive, he said, and they will know a lot more about this thing, but they just haven't been able to. They haven't got that far yet. What Robin, if the European Central Bank was to go belly up off the back of, I don't know, Deutsche Bank going skew whiff or some ridiculous domino effect that I suppose is feasible at the moment. What would the UK liability be at this stage of the proceedings?
Well, I think the European Investment Bank is where our liability extends. I'm no expert on this. I've talked to lots of different people in the finance world about this, and there's a general consensus of opinion that our sort of upper limit liability is certainly in the hundreds of billions. Some are saying up to $1 trillion. Some are saying, but all are saying in the hundreds of billions at least is our liability because of we put a certain amount of capital into the European Investment Bank, and that capital was lent out on a multiplier. So in other words, trillions of euros were lent on it. If that defaults, then the UK is the sort of kind of lender of last resort sort of thing, and therefore has to pay that bill sort of thing. I don't know.
When we leave,
I don't know. We are stuck with that liability regardless anyway, because Boris signed the withdrawal agreement, which I don't think he should ever have signed on that very basis.
I just thought I'd let that sink in. Nice pregnant pause. So just to clarify that, Robin, irrespective of so-called Brexit, we're still liable if the ECB goes belly up after December the 31st.
Yeah, I mean, if the Eurozone starts defaulting all over the place, which it looks like it's going to, doesn't it? It looks like Italy's not going to be able to pay its bills, which is why it wants Corona bonds to solve that problem. Then our investment and the loans that were given out via the European Investment Bank, the EIB, will fall onto the UK, and also the IMF as well, because the IMF are in for that as well. I'm afraid I'm not a financier, but all the people I've spoken to tell me that it's orders of magnitude in the hundreds of billions at the minimum, maybe higher.
Yet again. I mean, where are the questions in the mainstream media? I don't see how that correlates to getting Brexit done.
No, exactly. I mean, this is the problem. Go back to the general election campaign. We didn't get into any of that stuff in the general election campaign. We just got pictures of Boris driving a tractor through a brick wall, saying "Get Brexit done," and yet another, bus being driven around the country with a slogan on it. There's no real interrogation by the media anymore of what's really going on. But in terms of Brexit, I think it's kind of in peril. But having said that, I think what happens in the EU? I think either the EU takes the step towards one federalised system by issuing Corona bonds, becoming one entity, one super state, or it will kind of implode on the back of this. Will we be part of that? Can't see why we would be part of it. Can't see the political will existing for us to be part of that.
I'll tell you, I mean, blimey, this coronavirus thing is, I know people personally who've succumbed to it now. And I don't know what the complications were, how misdiagnosed it all was and what have you. I know people that are in a lot of grief over this, frankly. But I do think that there is a strong possibility that the EU could be the silver lining. they could really be finished off. No?
Yeah, I don't think it's good news for the EU, really. And fortunately, we are positioned outside the EU, although technically we haven't escaped yet. But that's why I say I think this whole move to try and extend the extension period, because everybody's far too busy to discuss a free trade agreement, is just a bit pointless, really.
I would agree. I think I think actually the longer, because while Britain is still in, there is still some control and there's still things that we're not allowed to do because we're not fully out, and we get sanctioned and fined by the EU for doing them.
Yeah.
Why not just say, look, let's cut the cord right now, because the best thing that we can actually do for ourselves, well, it's one of the reasons why the borders weren't closed is because we're not allowed to close the borders to the EU countries. So, and actually,
Schengen's dead. Schengen is dead.
I know, but this is what I'm saying. In America, the thing that actually helped the most with this, and even Fauci's had to begrudgingly agree to this, is the closing of the borders was actually instrumental in actually making sure that America didn't have as big a problem as it could have. Now,
I don't know. It seems to me
Britain didn't close, and why didn't Britain close? Because it can't. If we cut the cord completely, Britain had more opportunity to do the things that actually will work, rather than being hamstrung and having to fight this with one hand tied behind their back by the EU.
It just seems to me that the EU needs to get Zoom. I want to say a big, big thank you to my special guest tonight, today, this morning, this afternoon, Robin Horsley, upolitics.uk. Robin, thank you, sir. And Boozy, thanks for popping in, mate. Toting his gun in California. And everybody in the comments, thank you. Thank you. Report from London tomorrow with Charlotte Jameson popping in to talk about what it's like there now. How, I don't know. Is it going to be like a foreign country when it's martial law on the streets in London? Within, I don't know, operating in a foreign territory or what? Yeah, she's laid up at home. She's been temporarily laid off from the clinic. Going to be talking about health service generally and a bit of nutrition and stuff like that. And hopefully having a few laughs. Monday to Saturday, folks, 5 p.m. UK time. That's noon EDT. That's stateside. DC. Mr. President, call in. And I don't know if that cleared much up for any of you. I just got a shed load of questions, But I'll tell you what, it's a bit weird at the moment. It's a bit weird where I am. You get, in about 20 minutes time, everybody's going to come out on their balconies and start applauding the health workers and all the first responders and all the rest of it. People stacking the shelves. And when the police go past with their sirens, people will be clapping the police. And that is just so weird to somebody like me, who is a libertarian. But anyway, I just hope that people have got, everybody else's best interests at heart. And we will doubtless find out as time goes on. In the meantime, I promise you, I'll keep asking the questions. God bless you. Nighty night. Here's to us and bugger plutocracy.